Welcome to On the Ballot with Ballotpedia, where we take a closer look at the week's top political stories. Ballotpedia connects people to politics by providing neutral, nonpartisan, and reliable information on our government, how it works, and where it's headed. We're here to give you the facts so you can form your own opinion. I'm Victoria Rose, and thanks for being with us. Today, we're checking in on the current Supreme Court term with staff writer Mish Till. Hey, Mish.
Hey, Victoria. How's it going?
Pretty well. How are you?
It's going pretty well on my side, too.
Good. Yesterday when we talked to go over the episode, you mentioned you wanted to go to law school. So are we going to have a Chief Mish on our hands soon? Chief Justice Mish?
I don't think so. You'll have maybe a lawyer Mish.
Well, we look forward to those days for you. Let's get into this current term. Where are we at in the life cycle of the Supreme Court?
Well, the Supreme Court's yearly term begins on the first Monday in October and lasts until the first Monday in October the following year, officially. So big picture wise, we're right around the halfway point, but typically the court takes its summer recess in late June or early July, and their summer break usually lasts until the next term begins. And also the court hears oral arguments before then, so from October until April.
So how do the numbers look for the 2022-2023 term? How many cases are on the docket and how many decisions have been rendered so far?
So as of February 16th, the court has agreed to hear 60 cases during the current term. The court has scheduled 59 of the cases for argument. One case was removed from the arguing calendar and another case has been dismissed. To date, the court has issued 9 decisions, and so we expect a lot more towards the end of the month and after.
And how does that compare to the last few years? We know that there's been quite a few high-profile cases on the docket this term, with the court chiming in on things like affirmative action, Section 230, redistricting, and a ton more. But in terms of numbers, is SCOTUS more or less active than usual?
So between 2007 and 2021, SCOTUS released opinions in a total of 1,128 cases, averaging at about 75 cases per year. In the 2021-2022 term, they agreed to consider 68 cases. And in the year before that, they considered 62. The court terms before that from 2016 to 2020 all featured more than 70 cases each. So the lower figure this term reflects some of the lower number of cases we've heard since President Joe Biden took office.
And since we're comparing this term to prior years, are cases coming from different appellate districts than we might have seen in the past, or is it pretty much the same?
Since the 2020 term, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit has had the highest number of cases granted by the Supreme Court, but that might be because the Ninth Circuit is the largest appellate court with 29 authorized judicial posts. It has jurisdiction over district courts in California, Arizona, and Hawaii, to name a few.
Okay, that makes sense. Are there any trends in the cases and opinions that are being presented to the court?
Well, the Supreme Court released its first ruling of the 2022 term on January 23rd of this year. According to NBC News, which cited Dr. Adam Feldman, a writer who reports SCOTUS statistics, this is unusually behind schedule. SCOTUS usually begins to roll out opinions in November or December. In fact, Feldman found that this is the first term since 1917 that the court hadn't released a ruling by early December. Among the reasons mentioned for this were the fact that there were fewer cases granted this term and a rise in substantive decisions in emergency applications.
It'll be interesting to see if this is something that continues into the next term or if it's just something peculiar to this term. Can you give our listeners a little bit of a sneak peek at the sort of analysis we'll do once the current term is over?
Well, we take a look every year at any given term ends to highlight noteworthy cases and any trends that we might have seen. In the 2021-2022 term, for example, Chief Justice John Roberts and Justice Elena Kagan wrote the most 5-4 opinions with 2 each. Justice Clarence Thomas and Sonia Sotomayor wrote 4-8-1 dissents, the most of any justice during the term. 2 of the cases that we've had our eye on for this term were Biden versus Nebraska and the Department of Education versus Brown. Both cases have to do with the Biden administration's current student loan debt relief program. So it'll be interesting to look back on these cases at the end of the term and analyze the judges' rulings.
Yeah, we'll definitely have you back later in the summer to break down that sort of analysis. But let's talk about some of the conflicts the court is going to hear arguments for in the near future. There are 9 cases calendared for the April sitting that starts next Monday, the 17th. Are any of them particularly interesting to you, Mish?
All of them are particularly interesting to me. But
we don't have 2 hours, so just pick your favorite.
Let's pick two. First is Groff versus DeJoy. And the background on this case is basically in 1977, SCOTUS ruled in Trans World Airlines Inc. versus Hardison that requiring an employer to bear more than a de minimis cost to accommodate an employee's religion constitutes as an undue hardship on the employer. Now, Gerald Groff, a U.S. Postal Service employee, is a Christian who did not want to work on Sundays due to his religious beliefs. In 2013, the U.S. Postal Service entered an agreement with Amazon to deliver packages on Sundays and holidays. Shout out to Jeff Bezos. At first, Groff was able to substitute Sunday shifts with extra shifts during the week. He eventually transferred post offices to prevent having to work on Sundays. However, demands for Sunday deliveries increased and Groff's options for accommodations decreased. So disciplinary actions were eventually taken as Groff refused to work on the Sundays where he was scheduled, and eventually he resigned after facing termination. Groff sued USPS in federal court for religious discrimination under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The district court ruled against Groff, and the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit affirmed the district court's decision. The second case we're looking at is Kahneman versus Colorado, which involves the First Amendment. The justices were asked to determine how to test whether a statement should be considered a true threat. Specifically, they were asked if a subjective test showing the speaker intended the statement to be threatening, or if an objective test showing that a reasonable person would feel threatened by the statement should be applied.
While we're talking about the courts, now feels like a good time to also check in on the status of President Joe Biden's Article 3 judicial nominations. As a reminder to our listeners, Article 3 judges are nominated by the president and confirmed by the U.S. Senate and include justices of the Supreme Court, judges of the circuit courts of appeal, judges of the district courts, and judges of the Court of International Trade. So, Mish, where's Biden at in terms of nominations, and how many of those nominations have been confirmed?
Since taking office in January of 2021, President Biden has nominated 158 people to Article 3 positions. And as of the beginning of April, the Senate has confirmed 119 of those nominees, 87 district court judges, 31 appeals court judges, and 1 Supreme Court justice.
And how does that compare to past presidents? I read a little bit about the historical context in our Robe and Gavel newsletter that came out this week, which listeners can check out in our show notes. So is Biden outpacing his predecessors, or is it pretty much business as usual as far as nominations go?
Well, presidents have made an average of 101 appointments through April 1st of their third year in office. Bill Clinton made the most appointments through April 1st of his third year with 137. President George H.W. Bush made the fewest with 74. President Donald Trump made the most appointments in 4 years with 234. And President Ronald Reagan made the fewest through 4 years with 166. But ironically, he also made the most appointments through 1 year in office with 41. So what we've been seeing from President Biden is a bit above average, but still a bit below his predecessor, President Trump, as well.
Got it. That's really interesting. And like I said, our listeners can learn more about the happenings of the Supreme Court in our Robe and Gavel newsletter. That is all I have for you, Mish. So thank you for coming on. It is always a pleasure.
Thank you, Victoria. And it was great to be on.
And that's all for this week's episode of On the Ballot. Make sure you don't miss an episode by subscribing, and do us a solid by dropping a review of On the Ballot wherever you listen to podcasts. We'll be back next week with another episode. And until then, if you have any questions, comments, or love for Ballotpedia, feel free to send it to us at ontheballot@ballotpedia.org or on Twitter @Ballotpedia. I'm Victoria Rose, and thanks for listening.